Hundred Palms has been making headlines as a resale EC that sold higher than a condo nearby, and also for its owners making close to $1 million in profit and over. So today we're going to deep dive into all the pros and cons of this development to understand why. So if you're a buyer looking here, you know exactly what to be aware of, and if you're a seller in this development, you know just how to position your unit. Now this is located in D19. Hundred Palms is over here. Now there's one problem with this area. Now just looking at the map, you can see it's actually surrounded by a lot of HDBs as well as landed, but there are very few condo and no resale EC in this area. So for a long time, anybody wanting to look for a resale EC here, there is very little supply. You have to go further out, and there's a built up and pent up demand over here. Now looking also at the overall market, a lot of people are unaware that Hundred Palms is actually the last two ECs that will MOP for a long period of years in the market before we have the next one. So it was TOP in 2019, followed by River Cove, and then there was a big gap where there were no new ECs that were launched. The following one was only in 2023. So this means that Hundred Palms MOPing in December, we have River Cove this year, and then for the next 3 years, you're not going to see any new resale EC enter the market. So anyone that's looking to buy a resale one, they'll firstly want to see the youngest, right? So the youngest will definitely be River Cove and Hundred Palms, and they'll be able to maintain that status at least until about 2028. And of course, this is not a bad location at all, which adds to the demand. So what type of facings will you be able to get? Now on the outside of the Hundred Palms, you're going to be facing Yio Chu Kang Road on this side over here. So outwards here will be towards Regent-Ville, which is an older condo, and then on the other side here you have Salvation Army. As with most of these type of resale ECs, when you're in an estate with a lot of housing, the premium view is actually going to be in the middle towards the pool, which is why you'll see over here most of the large units are placed facing towards the pool. Let's dive into the 3-bedroom. So for 3 bedrooms, you're going to have 3 categories, which is the 3-bed plus yard, and then you have one where it's 3-bed plus study, getting an extra study room, or you can choose 3-bed plus utility, which is the yard, but then you get an extra utility room. Let's first look at the 3-bed plus yard. So for this, your two smaller sizes are going to be 883 square feet and also 915 square feet. And for facing wise, the smaller one, 883, will be outwards towards the Salvation Army side. And then for the 915 square feet, it will be inwards towards the pool. So let's look at the differences in the layout. So firstly, they are quite similar in the sense that they have 3 good sized bedrooms, a pretty good sized living room, I would say. For both, the dining table position is quite similar over here. Now where the difference is going to come in between the sizes of these two is actually mainly the kitchen. So if you look at this kitchen over here, for 883, it is more vertical and slightly smaller versus 915, where you have a more horizontal layout, I would say. You have the yard at the side. Then this gives you a bit more counter space because you have an L-shaped kitchen over here. Now if you ask me, between the two, when you walk in, you're not going to feel much difference between these two layouts. So let's look at the pricing. Now the first thing to note is that for the 883 square feet as well as the 915 over here, now Hundred Palms famously, when they launched, it sold out within 7 hours. So this is why if you look at the price that it was purchased at, it's all actually very similar, around the 800 plus PSF range back then. Now this is quite different versus some of the launches you will see where it doesn't sell on day one, and maybe 2 years down the road closer to TOP, the developers are still selling. Very likely they usually increase the price, and then you have different entry prices across the phases. But because Hundred Palms sold out in one day and the developer priced them all very closely together, at least for these two sizes, you'll see that the baseline and break even is quite close in terms of PSF for these two. And this is why if right now you hop onto property platforms, you'll see that the PSF listed for both sizes, even though one is bigger, is actually very similar. So how much are you paying more for the bigger layout in that case? So for the size difference, it's about 32 square feet. Now on average right now, if you go onto property portals, you'll see that the PSF maybe is about 1,850. So this means that what you're paying extra for the bigger layout is about 59,200, assuming maybe it's the same floor. Now, in my opinion, what you're really paying for over here is actually the facing. Because if you remember, for the bigger one, we're facing the pool, and then for AA3, we are facing outwards. But when you walk into the unit, it will still feel quite similar. So is 59,000 justifiable for an extra luxury of a pool view? Let's look at a recent EC launch. So many of you might have heard of Orel. So what is an acceptable premium? Now I chose this development because where it's situated is actually pretty similar to 100 Palms situation. So we're actually looking at Stack 5 and then Stack 29 over here. Now Stack 5 is actually facing another development at the side, similar to what we see in our case, and then for Stack 29 is facing the pool. Now looking at the selling price for Stack 5 versus Stack 29, the difference between the same floor but different facing, we see is 60k to 110k. So we already know that this is an accepted premium in the market to get a better pool view. So today looking at 100 Palms, if the resale gap for 2 units available is about 59k, I think it's actually quite a safe entry and should be quite easy to exit in the future. And if any other units you're able to keep it below this, it should give you some margin of buffer. Now, the other thing we want to consider is the next biggest layout. So we have the 1,055 square feet one over here. Now, for this one, what is the difference? Now, first of all, you're going to have a bit more privacy when you come in because it doesn't directly look into the dining like we saw with the 2 smaller layout earlier. And for your yard and kitchen, it is actually separated. So your yard is over here and then your kitchen is here. Now, the biggest difference compared to the smaller one is actually the balcony. So if you look over here, it is linked to the kitchen. So some people like this because when you cook, it's very easy to ventilate, or some even use it as storage area, while some other people don't really like this because they feel it's a bit of waste of space and that could be incorporated inside the unit instead. So how do we know whether to go for this bigger layout versus the 2 smaller ones that we saw earlier? So let's look at another 3-bedroom that MOP in recent years, which is Soul Acres. Now Soul Acres has 2 3-bedroom layouts which are very similar to 100 Palms. Now you have your 926, which is very similar to the 915 square feet, 3 bedrooms, kitchen here with yard at the side. And then you have your 1098 square feet, which is similar to your 1055 we saw just now, where you have the kitchen connected to the open balcony area. So which did better in the resale market? Now let's have a look. So for the top performing 3 bedrooms of this size range in Soul Acres, you can see a lot of them are 1098 square feet. Their profits going up to about 700k plus. So there is demand for this layout. But if we also look at the 900 plus one, we can see their profits are also quite decent. An important thing to note, which is very similar to 100 Palms, their purchase PSF for both sizes is around the 700 plus PSF range. So when they launched, PSF wise, the 2 layouts were actually very close. And today, their resale price, similarly, we can see the range is quite similar for both sizes at about 1,400 PSF. So actually the difference in profit is really just coming from the 1,098 square feet being a bit bigger, but in terms of PSF, they are both very close. So then which should we go for? Because we see there are demand for both. So the question really comes down to the quantum. So let's go back to 100 Palms. So for the smaller size, 883 square feet, which has very similar features to the 900 plus, versus the biggest of 3-bedroom yard, which is 1,055 square feet, what we can see is that the difference in size is 172 square feet. So if we take the average again at about 1,850 per square foot, this means the difference in quantum is 318k. Now, right now, if you just hop onto any property platform, you'll see that maybe for the smaller sizes, they range at about close to 1.6 million. And then for this size, being 300k more, on average for 1,055 square feet is about 1.9 to 2 million and above. So actually the quantum jump is quite big of a gap. Someone with the 1.6 budget likely does not have the 2 million budget to be able to easily float between the 2 categories. So I would say both actually will do great in the market, but depending on what your budget is, choose the size accordingly to the quantum. Now, one more thing we want to consider, because a lot of people are comparing 100 Palms to the nearby condos. So we saw that for the 5-bedroom at 100 Palms, it did transact higher than Affinity at Serangoon, even the highest transacted for a big unit, right? So looking at the 3-bedroom, how does it compare to Affinity? Between the two categories, 100 Palms will still have an advantage. Now, why do I say that? Look at the smaller size for Affinity's 3-bedroom, which is at 850 square feet. So again, you have good sized bedrooms here, but the key distinction between the two, I would say, is the kitchen area. Because for the smallest 3-bedroom at Affinity, it is an open kitchen concept, and right when you walk in, you will see it. The living room also feels a bit more narrow, versus 100 Palms, which has a pretty typical 3-bedroom for own stay layout. I would say you have a bit more of a wider living room, proper enclosable kitchen with yard over here. Now looking at the 900 plus square feet also. So again, for Affinity, 904 square feet. This one you will now have a kitchen that can be enclosable if you want, but you can see it's much smaller, tucked at the side, and the living room actually becomes more narrow over here. Versus the 900 plus here, which again, proper enclosable kitchen and living room. So to sum up, for 3-bedroom plus yard, my first choice would be 883 square foot, because this is the most accessible category and you still have a high ROI for it. And then followed by 1055 square feet for the unique layout, and then lastly 915 square feet. Moving on to the 3-bedroom plus yard and utility and study. Let's look at the two smaller layouts first. So you have 958 square feet and 969 square feet. Now both of these are going to be facing outwards, either towards the Salvation Army or Regent-Ville. Now internally they are actually very similar with just two differences. So for 958 square feet, you now have an extra utility room at the back of your kitchen with a wash closet. Now I really want to give them props for having a window in the utility room, which of course give it more ventilation and makes it more flexible also. I find that with a lot of newer launches nowadays, even with your utility room, you're not going to have a window much like you would with older condos. For 969, you also get an extra room and a wash closet in your kitchen here, but the extra room is actually next to your kitchen. The entrance is also a little bit different. You have a bit more privacy because they can't look directly into your dining area. So let's say you're having dinner with your kids, you all are talking, or you're just eating very unglam, nobody can look at you when they walk past and your door is open. Versus this one is a bit more direct. Now between the two, the facing types are so similar and the size is so close, but I would say layout wise, 969 has a little bit more of an edge, and that's because of where the extra room is placed. Now because it's next to the kitchen, you can use it as a utility if you wanted, like 958, but it can also be an enclosed study or a very small room. So this gives it a bit more flexibility than the other one where you might not necessarily want to put an enclosable study at the back of your kitchen where a lot of people are going in and out of. But we want to look at pricing as well. So how does the price for this in the resale market compared to the smallest for the 3-bedroom plus yard that we saw earlier, which is 883 square feet. So size difference, 75 square feet, which at the average PSF, if I take 1,850 again, this will bring it to 139k. So this is what you're paying for the extra wash closet as well as extra room. Now, the difference between the two layouts, they are 11 square feet apart, which means the price would just be 20k apart. Now, which one should you go for? They are so similar. So if you look at these two layouts, something to notice, it is actually very similar to what you will see in a 4-bedroom HDB. This layout, I feel like the prime audience is really going to be HDB upgraders. So how affordable and easy is it for someone to enter from a HDB upgrading into this now, as well as in the future? So first, let's look at the surrounding and what the breakdown is. Let's say we go with the bigger one, 969 square feet at 1,850 PSF. This will be about 1.79 million. So 25% payment is about 450k with your buyer stamp duty at 59k. So someone will need 509k to purchase this unit, assuming they qualify for the loan. So can the surrounding HDBs actually afford to enter this? So if you look at where 100 Palms is located, again, we see that 100 Palms is over here. Now, the surrounding HDBs in the immediate vicinity are all quite old. So we want to look at how the selling price is for that, but also for the newer generation of BTOs, which for the newest one we can see is around the Fernville area. So firstly, looking at the older HDBs. So for this, they are selling at around 600 to 500k. and they were built in about 1990s to 1980s, depending on which block you are at. So for someone that's staying in the older HDB, assuming fully paid, it would actually be quite easy for them to just cash out and down pay for this. Now looking at the younger ones, so if we look at Fernvale Woods, one of the newer MOP HDBs, now their purchase price was about 252k back then for a 4-bedroom. Now today it is selling, only just a few units have sold because it's just MOP at about 680k, which means the profit they take back, 428k, assuming they have put some CPF into the unit, about 80k, on hand they were at 508k. So looking at the down payment just now at 509k, it would actually be quite easy for them to just top up and put in without any extra cash. If you're someone holding a newly MOP HDB nearby, it will be quite easy for you to transition into this. Now another cluster of HDB not too far off will be Bidadari. Some of the demand will actually come over here, because if you're looking at this size 3-bedroom there, in the surrounding is easily 2.3 to 2.4 million. So for those that are not looking to go for such a high quantum and upgrading for Bidadari, this will be a very comfortable place to get a good size that is similar to the layout they have in their HDB, but at a much lower quantum. It does have quite a unique standpoint in terms of the whole of D19. Now for the next two bigger, we have 1001 square feet and then 1012 square feet. And this will be facing inwards towards the pool as well as outward towards Regent View. Now internally, they are actually very similar to the two layouts we just went through, except now you have a longer balcony over here that extends to the bedroom area. So should you go for this? It really depends if you want that extra space and you're someone that enjoys a large balcony. But functionally, I would say it doesn't have too much of an advantage over the two that we just saw earlier, except if maybe you want an inward pool facing, you might want to go for the 1001 square feet one, because the two smaller layouts are both facing outwards. Following that, we have the 1055 square feet layout, and I really have a soft spot for this layout because of the wide frontage. Now, if you see any of my other videos, you know that in newer condos, this is usually reserved for the larger bedroom types like the 4 and 5 bedrooms, or it will be categorized as a 3-bedroom premium. And this will really open up the space and make it feel bigger when you walk in. On top of that, you have a utility and yard as well. If you remember, for the 3-bedroom plus yard, we have one that was 1055 square feet also, but for this you are able to squeeze in so much more. So I really feel that this layout among all the 3 bedrooms is actually quite outstanding, and of course this will be facing the pool as well. Now for 1130 square feet, this is a bit more similar to the other layout where you have the kitchen connected to the balcony. So if you are someone that likes that for more ventilation or storage at the back of your kitchen, you can consider this. In addition, you now have the utility which will be next to the yard, so you can make a very comfortable helper's room or even washing area because it is separate from the kitchen. And also these will be pool facing. Now between the two, is it better to go for the wide frontage or the more narrow frontage when it comes to a resale EC context? Let's look at another EC, the Terrace, which has similarly two types of layout, one with the wide frontage and then one with the more normal living room front. Now in their case, the wider frontage one was a bit bigger, 1173, and then for the normal one is 1076 square feet. So which did better in the resale market? Now for both, we can see these are some of the highest transacted. Profit is very healthy. But for 1173, they managed to top higher in terms of profit. Now, what is interesting to note here also is usually for bigger layouts, we'll see the average selling PSF is a bit lower. But here, even with the bigger size, the wide frontage one is able to hit a higher PSF of close to 200 over compared to the PSF of the normal frontage layout. So we can really see that for the wide frontage in resale EC, there is a demand. Most people that are buying resale EC, they want the space. So between the two, in our case, the one with the wide frontage, I will say that's actually an advantage and I will go for that. So in conclusion, my top choice for the 3-bedroom plus utility or study will be the 1055 square feet. Because in this case, for this same size compared to smaller one, it has all the function within. And what we saw from the Terrace, where the wide frontage does better, even when it's a bigger unit, here, even though we are the smaller unit, we are able to have that advantage. And this will be able to pull in demand in your resale exit in the future. Now followed by the 969 and 958 square feet, because this is going to be the most efficient while still giving you the function, followed by the 1130 square feet, and then after that 1011 and 1012 over. Next, we have the 4 bedrooms. Now, for 4 bedrooms, you'll have just 2 layouts, which is 1270 and 1324. As with the bigger units in 100 Palms, they will all be facing towards the pool. So where are the differences? This is mainly, again, going to be where your kitchen and your utility is. So for 1270, your kitchen is at the side, connected to the balcony again, and your utility and yard is separated over here, again with your wash closet as well. For your entrance is also a bit different in the sense that you kind of walk in here and there is a curve before you arrive at your dining area. So the entrance is actually a bit longer. And then for 1324, you're going to have your kitchen here tucked in next to your utility. And then for your entrance is also a bit shorter here. However, for the extra space in the balcony, this will now be connected to the last bedroom instead of the kitchen. Now, between the two, which would I prefer? I would say both are quite similar. It mainly just comes down to your preference of the kitchen. But if I were to have an extended balcony like that, I actually prefer it to be connected to the kitchen because functionally it just adds a lot more and gives you more ventilation. Also, it makes the space feel quite a bit bigger, especially if you have a glass kitchen where you have the light coming in from the other side as well, which might give you that wide effect. Lastly, we have the 5 bedrooms and just one layout for this at 1,528 square feet. And for both stacks, it will be facing towards the swimming pool. Now, this is actually very similar to the larger 4 bedroom we just went through, except now you have a junior master suite over here, which comes with its own attached bathroom. So this is great if you have multi-generational families. Like if you have your parents staying with you or older kid, you want them to have their own bathroom, a bit more privacy. This works great. But the question is, how do we know if the value can hold in the future or even grow as we enter into a 5 bedroom? Let's look at the supply in the area currently. Now, this area has very low supply of 5 bedrooms. Now, right now, in terms of units that are selling, there's only 100 Palms, which has 3 units now on listings. Affinity does not have 5 bedroom apartments. It will be in the form of cluster houses. And then for garden residence, there is 1 unit for sale. So let's compare the layout between the two. Now, for garden residence, which is 1,539 square feet, it is very similar in size, but you get a private lift, wide frontage living room, and even a dry kitchen. So definitely it feels a lot more luxurious compared to 100 Palms. However, the strategy for 5 bedrooms is always to take advantage of the low supply, especially in an area like this where you have very low condo and EC supply. You don't have much competition. So as much as there is little 5 bedroom units, there are also not that many people that can buy into a 5 bedroom. But when they are looking, because there are not much options usually, you as a seller will be able to command the price because of the lack of supply. So if you're buying a 5 bedroom, buy to stay and hold until you find the right buyer in the future. We have come to the end of this video. Now, if you'd like me to analyze any other developments, you're welcome to drop them in the comments. Or if you have questions about 100 Palms or the price at the point of time you're looking, you're welcome to drop me a message at the listed contacts, and I'll catch y'all in the next video.